A bleeding billionaire collapsed at a stranger's door at 11:47 on a Wednesday night. And when she opened it, she didn't call the police. She didn't scream. She didn't even step back. She looked at him for exactly 3 seconds, the way a person looks at something they recognize from a version they've seen before. And then she dragged him inside and locked the door behind them like she'd been preparing for precisely this kind of trouble her entire life. That was the night Ryu Seojun stopped being the most powerful man in any room he entered and became, for the first time in 14 years, just a man. But before that, before the door opened, before the knock that barely made a sound, there was a building on Yungang-aro that the city had been quietly forgetting for years. The hallway light on the third floor buzzed at a frequency that made you aware of it without being able to explain why. The carpet runner was second-hand, faded into a color that had once been burgundy and was now simply tired. 3 doors on the left, 2 on the right, and at the far end a window that looked out over a parking structure and, if you turned your head at a specific angle, a sliver of sky. Outside Unit 4B, close against the wall, a terracotta pot sat with a small rosemary plant inside it, leaves still dark despite the season, tended with the specific care of someone who understood that small living things required consistent attention. On the doorstep itself, drawn in blue chalk that the rain hadn't fully erased, 2 stick figures. One tall, one small. Arms stretched wide. Not reaching for each other. Just open. As if the person who drew them believed that wide-open arms were simply the correct way to stand in the world. There was no strategic explanation for why Ryu Seojun was on this floor, at this door, at this hour. His driver had gone for the car. The parking structure had been the last option. The internal bleed from the altercation in the warehouse district had been building for 40 minutes by the time his legs stopped working at precisely Unit 4B. And his hand found the door once, barely a sound, and his body decided that was enough. Ava Cole had been awake. She was always awake at this hour, going over client notes at the small table by the window, a cup of tea that had gone cold an hour ago sitting forgotten beside her laptop. When she heard the knock, and it was barely a knock, more the sound a person makes when they no longer have the strength to announce themselves properly. She stood without thinking. She moved to the door and looked through the peephole and saw a man she had never seen before folded against the wall like something structural had given way inside him. She opened the door. She looked at him for 3 seconds. Not at the blood. Not at the quality of the suit or the cut of the jacket. She looked at his face. And something in the way he was trying to hold himself upright told her everything she needed to know about the kind of person who would make it this far before stopping. She dragged him inside by the arm and locked the door behind them. She worked with the speed and precision of someone who had done this in conditions that did not permit hesitation. Not panicked. Not performing competence. Simply competent, in the way that people are when the skill is deep enough to have become instinct. She found the source within the first 2 minutes. She had the medical cabinet open, organized, labeled in her own handwriting, maintained the way someone maintains something they know they will need, before he had finished deciding whether to tell her who he was. He didn't tell her. He watched her work instead. Watched her hands, the economy of her movements, the way she assessed and responded and adjusted without commentary. The apartment assembled itself in his peripheral vision. A bookshelf, not decorative. The books were red, spines creased, some with folded corners. A child's drawing on the wall, full of color and intention, with the word home written in crayon in the lower corner, the H slightly backwards. He looked at that word for a moment longer than everything else. He was still looking at it when the small voice came from the hallway. Mama. A pause. Is that a man? Ava didn't look up from what she was doing. Go back to bed, Eli. Is he okay? He will be. Bed. A longer pause. The sound of small feet retreating, slowly, with the specific reluctance of a child who is filing information as he goes rather than simply obeying. Then quiet. Ava opened a sterile package without looking at it, which meant she had done this enough times that her hands knew the order of things. She kept working. Seojun kept watching her. Neither of them said anything for a while, and the silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people who had both, in their separate lives, learned not to fill silences that didn't need filling. At 20 past midnight, the child came back. He appeared at the hallway edge, not entering, not leaving. He had positioned himself at the precise distance between involvement and neutrality, the way a person stands when they have made a deliberate choice about exactly how much they are committing to being present. He was 5 years old and wearing pajamas printed with small blue rockets. He looked at Seo-jun the way he looked at things he hadn't decided about yet, with complete, unblinking attention. There was a bowl on the table. Something warm in it, steam still faintly visible. Eli had set it there without anyone asking. "She makes it when people are off," he said. His voice was matter-of-fact, as if he was confirming a known fact. "Not bad off. Just wrong somehow." Seo-jun looked at the bowl. Then at the boy. "She made this for me? I made it. She showed me how." He paused. "You should eat it." It was not a suggestion. It was the statement of someone who had thought about the situation and arrived at a clear conclusion and was presenting it as such. Seo-jun picked up the spoon. He ate. Eli watched with the expression of someone whose specific concern was finally being addressed. "You're tall," Eli said after a moment. "Yes." Eli considered this. "That's useful. For shelves and things." Then, as if the accounting was complete, he moved to the armchair in the corner and folded himself into it with the same decisive efficiency he brought to everything else, and within 10 minutes he was asleep, knees tucked up, one hand pressed flat against the armrest. Ava came back at 1 in the morning to check on Seo-jun. She stopped when she saw Eli in the armchair. She looked at her son's sleeping face. She looked at the empty bowl. Something moved through her expression. Small, private, not for anyone. Not intended to be seen. The specific kind of feeling that a person has when the world does something they weren't bracing for. She set it down before it could fully form and turned her attention back to the man on her couch. He saw it. He said nothing. He filed it. In the morning, she brought tea and sat across from him. She told him that she had found the medical card in his wallet. That she hadn't looked at anything else. He placed the wallet on the table between them and she didn't reach for it. He understood without being told that this was not about money or opportunity. She hadn't looked because she had decided not to, which was different from not having the access, and she wanted him to know the difference. "You made a choice not to look," he said. "Most people would have made it differently." She was quiet for a beat. "Most people haven't been nurses." Past tense. He noted it. He didn't push. They sat in a silence that neither of them rushed. Outside, the city was already moving into its morning version of itself, and in the apartment on Yungjingaro the light came in at a low angle and lay across the floor in strips, and it was all very ordinary and completely still. He had been awake most of the night, which meant he had also been thinking. Not about Ava, not yet. About the parking structure. About what Hannah's operational report that morning had and hadn't said. And about what someone would have to believe about him to arrange what had been arranged. He had been thinking about this with the part of his mind that was always running the calculation, always mapping the board, always checking the sightlines. It was the part that had been running for 14 years without interruption, and he was aware of it the way he was aware of the buzzing hallway light. Present, constant, a frequency he had stopped noticing. He left at 8:30. She handed him a piece of paper she had written before he was awake. Signs to watch for. Specific, organized, written in a hand that moved quickly and knew what it was doing. He noted this. She had woken before him and used the time to write something useful. Before he left, he offered her money. He did it the way he offered solutions to all problems, directly without softening it. He had resources. She had spent hers. This was the obvious resolution. She declined without drama. Without the particular stiffness that sometimes accompanied polite refusals that are actually resentful. She simply said no. "What can I do?" he said. She thought about it for a moment. "The medical supplies I used. Replace them. That's all." He agreed. He left his private card on the table, not his corporate contact, the card that actually reached him, and walked out. In the hallway, he looked at the rosemary pot for a moment. He looked at the blue chalk stick figures on the doorstep, faded at the edges but still there, still with their arms wide. He went down the stairs and into the city and did not look back. The card stayed on the table. She didn't pick it up. She didn't throw it away either. He came back Thursday evening. He did not pretend even to himself that this was a strategic decision. He stood in front of the door on the third floor and he knocked and she opened it and looked at him without surprise, which was itself a specific kind of response that he didn't quite know what to do with. "You're not concussed anymore," she said. "Not critically." He paused. "You said not critically." Something moved at the corner of her mouth. It wasn't quite a smile. It was the expression of someone who had said a precise thing, and was mildly satisfied that it had been retained. She stepped back and let him in. Over the following days, Thursday through the following Saturday, 6 days total, he recovered in the apartment on Yungang-aro. He could have recovered elsewhere. He had a residence with medical staff and controlled environments and every resource that his condition might have required. He stayed in the apartment on Yungang-aro. This was not a decision he made. It was a decision that had already been made by the time he arrived at the door Thursday evening, and he simply acknowledged it. There was a day with the dishes. He wanted to help after dinner. He followed Ava to the sink without asking, just stood up when she did and walked with her, as if this was simply the next thing that happened, and she accepted it without comment, which itself told him something. The acceptance without comment was its own kind of information. She handed him the sponge without looking at him. He picked up a bowl and washed it with the seriousness of a person who understood that doing a thing correctly mattered, even when the thing was small. He had no idea where the bowl went. He placed it somewhere that seemed reasonable, a middle shelf, one of several, and she moved it without looking at him, without saying anything, to a shelf on the left that was, he saw now, the correct shelf. He watched exactly where her hand placed it. He noted the height. He noted the position. He filed it. He washed the next item and placed it in the correct position without being told. She paused, barely anything, a fraction of a second, the breath width of a hesitation, and something changed in the way she was standing beside him. Not a large thing. Nothing that would have registered to a person not paying attention. But he was paying attention. The specific quality of stillness that a person has when something unexpected has just happened and they are deciding, in real time, whether to acknowledge it or let it pass. She let it pass. She picked up the next bowl and handed it to him. They washed dishes together in silence for several minutes. Not uncomfortable silence. The silence of two people who had both, in their separate ways, stopped needing to fill quiet with noise. Outside the window the city was doing its evening things. Inside the apartment the water ran and things were washed and placed, and it was all very domestic and very ordinary, and Riva June was aware, in some precise part of himself, that he could not identify the last time he had stood in a kitchen and done something this ordinary. Eli appeared in the kitchen doorway in his socks and looked at the dish situation with the air of an inspector who had arrived to assess compliance. "The handle goes in last," he said, regarding a pot that Seo Jun was holding. His voice carried the patience of someone explaining something to a person who means well but has obvious gaps. "So you can get it out without burning yourself." "Thank you." "Also," Eli pointed with one finger, authoritative, "the tall shelf. That one's for the big things. Mama uses the step to reach it. You won't need one. You're tall." "I'm aware. It's useful," Eli said for the second time, with the satisfaction of someone whose ongoing hypothesis about the practical value of height was receiving strong continuous validation. He considered the state of the dish situation for another moment, found it now acceptable, and went back to his homework. Ava had her back to both of them. Her shoulders were moving in a way that suggested she was doing something very deliberate with her face. Seo Jun turned back to the sink. He was, for the first time in recent memory, almost smiling at a kitchen sink. He noted this as well, the way he noted everything. He filed it in the category of things he did not yet know what to do with, which was a category he had not previously had much use for and which was filling up quickly. That evening they talked about the building, the neighborhood. She mentioned that the rosemary pot had been outside 4B since Eli was 2. Seo Jun said he had noticed it, and that someone tended it carefully. "Gerald," Eli said from the kitchen table without looking up, in the tone of someone correcting an insufficient factual record. Ava looked at Seo Jun. He looked at her. "Gerald," he confirmed. "He needed a name," Eli said. "Things need names." Otherwise you don't pay attention to them properly. He turned a page of his workbook. Subject closed. Seo-jun looked at Ava. She was looking somewhere else. But not before he caught the expression, and filed it, and understood that this was a woman who had a great deal of interior life that she kept very carefully managed. On Saturday afternoon, Ava stepped out for a client call. Seo-jun and Eli were at the kitchen table. Eli was drawing detailed work, a city from above streets grid with the precision of someone who found systems satisfying. He drew for a while without speaking. Then, without looking up, "Do you have kids?" "No." Eli's pencil kept moving. "Do you want them?" Seo-jun looked at the boy beside him. The rocket pajamas had been replaced today with a blue sweater. The pencil moved across the paper in small confident strokes. Those careful eyes, downcast and working but aware. Always aware. "I hadn't considered it seriously," Seo-jun said. Eli nodded. Still drawing. Then, "I don't have a dad." A pause. "I know. It's okay." Another stroke of the pencil. "Mama says some families are built different from others. Like how some buildings have different shapes but they're still all buildings." He finally looked up. He held Seo-jun's gaze for a long moment, the full unblinking attention of a child who has decided something merits his complete focus. Something moved in those eyes. An assessment. A conclusion. Then he went back to his drawing, as if having said what needed saying. Seo-jun sat with what had just happened in the room for a very long time. From the next room, Ava's voice continued, low, professional, entirely unaware that her son had just said something that went into Seo-jun like a key into a lock he had not known was there. On Sunday morning he woke on the couch. The folded blanket had been on its arm since the first night, placed there without discussion as if its presence had been anticipated, to the sound of small careful movements in the kitchen. Eli was up before sunrise, moving with the specific deliberateness of a child trying not to wake anyone. He was already dressed, which Seo-jun would later understand was simply who Eli was. A person who dressed before breakfast because the order of things mattered to him. Eli appeared in the doorway holding a bowl with both hands, carrying it with the gravity of someone transporting something important. He set it on the coffee table in front of Seo-jun. "Spoon on the right." "Thank you," Seo-jun said. Eli sat on the armchair. His chair, it had become clear, and pulled his own bowl onto his lap. "The spoon goes on the right," he said. "I noticed. Mama taught me." He ate. "She says details matter because they're how people know you were paying attention." Seo-jun looked at the bowl. He thought about a woman who had written a list of symptoms before he was awake, and left it on the table beside the card she had not picked up. He thought about the correct shelf. He picked up his spoon. They ate breakfast together in the Sunday morning quiet, and it was the most ordinary thing Seo-jun had done in years, and it was the best. When Ava came out of her room she stopped in the doorway. She looked at the two of them at the table. She looked at the spoon on the right side of Seo-jun's bowl. She looked at Seo-jun and then quickly, deliberately away. She went to make coffee. The back of her neck was doing something he filed carefully and did not mention. The homework sessions were daily. Eli had strong philosophical objections to schoolwork that he articulated with considerable precision, while also being entirely capable of completing it. Seo-jun sat beside him without condescension, as if the question being on a worksheet rather than in a board meeting made no meaningful difference to how seriously it deserved to be engaged. "Why does it matter how many apples the man has?" Eli said. "It teaches you to count things quickly." "I can already count." "Can you count quickly under pressure?" Eli looked at him, something recalculating behind his eyes. He did the problem. 40 seconds. He looked up at Seo-jun with the expression of someone who has been outmaneuvered and knows it but cannot find the flaw in the logic. "Fine," Eli said. He turned the page. Ava stood in the kitchen doorway. She appeared in doorways often, Seo-jun had noticed, preferring the threshold to being fully in the room when she was watching something she hadn't decided about yet, and looked at the two of them. Seo-jun patient, unbothered. Eli's pencil now moving with determination instead of protest. Something moved through her chest. She didn't examine it closely. She went back to the kitchen. The dinner conversations deepened over the days. She talked about her clients not by name but with the kind of detail that made them real. A man who insisted on dressing properly even on days he could barely stand, because the dressing was the last thing he controlled. A woman who had to water her plants in a specific order because she had done it that way for 40 years and the order was the meaning. "What does it cost you?" Seo-jun asked one evening. "To absorb their reality every day." She thought about this without hurrying. Not the surface version, the real answer. "I feel it fully when I'm there. And then I set it down when I leave. Not suppress it. Actually set it down. There's a difference. I've never done it that way." "I know." He looked at her. "How do you know?" She held her tea with both hands. She looked at it. Men who have learned to set things down deliberately look different from men who have learned simply not to feel them. A pause. The first kind, when they're not working, they're actually somewhere else. Present somewhere. The second kind, they're always half inside the calculation. Always running something in the background. Even when they're sitting still. She looked up at him. "You're the second kind. Or you have been." He was quiet for a moment. On the wall, the crayon home watched from its corner. Eli had his head bent over his drawing but his pencil had stopped moving. He was listening with the patience of a person who understood that the most significant things were sometimes said in the middle of other conversations. "Have been," Seo-jun said. Ava didn't answer. She looked at her tea. The not answering was its own answer, and both of them knew it. The dinner continued with both of them aware of the thing sitting in the room that neither of them had named. Eli ate with great focus and excused himself precisely, as though he had concluded that this particular room required fewer people to function correctly. One evening they were talking, close, unhurried, the kind of conversation that had been accumulating without either of them deciding it, built from smaller conversations the way walls are built from individual things placed carefully on top of each other. When Eli appeared in the doorway in his pajamas, he stopped. He looked between them with the unblinking attention he brought to things he was in the process of deciding about. "Did I interrupt something?" Complete seriousness. The question of someone who has made an observation and is requesting confirmation of its accuracy. "No," Ava said. Eli looked at them for another long beat. The look of a child cross-referencing what he is being told against what his eyes are reporting, and finding the accounts divergent. He went to the kitchen to get his water very deliberately, as though giving them time to reconsider their answer. He came back, gave them one more look and left. They did not quite look at each other afterward. The moment sat between them, acknowledged and unaddressed, the way things between two careful people sit before one of them finds the courage to say the true thing out loud. On the wall the H watched, slightly backwards, patient as a word that knows it will eventually be understood. On the fifth evening the apartment was quiet. Eli had been in bed for half an hour. Seo-jun was on the couch, and Ava was in the armchair with her client files, and neither of them was pretending very well to be only doing what they appeared to be doing. Eli's door opened. He appeared in the hallway, pajamas and an expression of official purpose. "I can't sleep," he said. "You're choosing not to," Ava said. Eli looked past her. He looked at Seo-jun on the couch. He looked at him with those careful, deciding eyes, and then said the thing that was not really about sleep at all. "Will you be here in the morning?" The room went completely still. The city outside made its indifferent sounds. The hallway light buzzed its constant frequency. Inside the apartment everything stopped. "Yes," Seo-jun said. "I'll be here." Eli found this sufficient. He went back to bed without another word. Ava and Seo-jun sat in the silence of two people who had just heard something said out loud that neither of them had said yet, and who both understood what it was, and who were not quite ready to say it themselves. They sat there for a long time. Neither of them moved. In the morning, Eli came out of his bedroom and walked into the living room and found Seo-jun on the couch. He looked at him for a long, long moment. Then he went to the kitchen to get the cereal. He brought 2 bowls. He set one on the coffee table in front of Seo-jun. He went back to his armchair. He didn't say a word. The not saying was the most significant thing Eli had communicated in 6 days. On Friday evening Seo-jun told her he needed to go back. "I know," she said. She was looking at her tea. He watched her not look at him and understood everything in the not looking. "I'll come back," he said. She didn't say anything. He understood that too. Saturday morning. He had the bag by the door. Eli was at the table drawing. Eli looked at the bag. His pencil moved. A house. A road. He drew for another minute in the particular silence of someone who has decided something but hasn't decided to say it yet. Then he stopped. He tore a small piece from the corner of his paper, carefully as though he had thought about the size in advance, and held it out across the table without looking up. On it, 2 stick figures. One tall, one small, arms stretched wide. "So you remember," Eli said. Seo-jun took the paper. He looked at it. He looked at Eli, who was already back to drawing as if the last 10 seconds hadn't happened. He folded the paper carefully and placed it in the inside pocket of his jacket, against his chest. Then he said goodbye to Ava, and she stood in the doorway of her kitchen and nodded once in the way she nodded at things she had accepted without fully making peace with. And he went out into the hallway and down the stairs and into the city. The hallway was the same. The building was the same. The city outside was the same. Everything was exactly as it had been before Wednesday night. Felt entirely specifically wrong. In the apartment, the door closing changed the quality of the air immediately. Not gradually. Just different. Eli ate lunch without talking. He moved Gerald the rosemary pot from the doorstep to the windowsill, where he could see it from the table. He did this without explanation. He completed his homework that afternoon quickly, without a single objection, which was itself the loudest kind of statement he could have made. Ava made dinner. She set 2 plates on the table. She stood back and looked at what she had done. 2 plates. She had not thought about it. Her hands had simply done what her hands had been doing for nearly a week. She stood looking at the second plate for a moment. Eli came to the table. He looked at the plates. He picked up his fork. He put it back down. He looked at the empty chair across from him. "He's coming back," he said. Ava looked at her son. "Yes. Okay." He picked up his fork. They ate. The apartment was very quiet, and it was a different quiet from before Wednesday. The quiet of something that had been changed by a presence, and had not yet finished adjusting to its absence. That night, after Eli was asleep, Ava sat in the sitting room in the dark. She was not a person who did this. She managed her emotional life with the same quiet practicality she brought to everything else. Feel it fully, then set it down. She had learned this before nursing, refined it through nursing, applied it every day in rooms where other people's fear and limitation required her to be fully present, without being consumed by what she was present for. She was good at it. It was one of the things she was most reliably good at. She sat in the dark anyway. She thought about the spoon on the right side, about a man who had put the bowl on the wrong shelf first, watched where she moved it, and put the next one correctly without being told. She thought about the details mattering and the attention that details required. She thought about a man who had been learning where things went not because someone told him to but because he was paying attention, and paying attention was how he moved through every room he entered, had always been how he moved, and that it had simply turned itself in this apartment onto the things that mattered in this apartment. The bowl on the correct shelf. The spoon on the right. The homework completed. The cereal bowl delivered with the gravity of a person transporting something important. He had been in this apartment for 6 days and he had learned the shape of it. Not the architecture, the interior shape, the small specific order of things, the way a person learns a language they intend to speak for a long time. Then she got up, washed the 2 plates and went to bed. He came back Wednesday. He came back the Sunday after that. These visits were different. He came for dinner. He stayed for conversation. He left before Eli's bedtime. There were no dishes. There was no staying. He was on the outside of the rhythm of the apartment, visiting it rather than living inside it, and everyone felt the difference. Not badly. Just present in the way that a change in temperature is present, noticeable, honest. Eli did not acknowledge the difference out loud. He simply arranged his homework at the kitchen table when Seo-jun arrived and did it with the quiet determination of someone who has decided that his contribution to the evening will be getting through these mathematics without philosophical objection. which he understood was a gift even if the recipient did not. He asked Seojun one question per visit. On Wednesday it was what the tallest building he had ever been in was and why. On Sunday it was whether people who ran things felt different from people who didn't, or if they just looked different on the outside. Seojun answered both questions seriously at full length, without talking to Eli the way adults talk to children when they were not really listening to the child. Eli filed the answers. He always filed things. Ava watched the two of them from the kitchen, from the doorway, from across the table. She watched the way a person watches something they have decided they are not deciding about yet. The watching itself was a decision, but she had not gotten to that part. On the third visit, a Sunday afternoon in October, Seojun sat across from Ava at the kitchen table and reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He set the small piece of paper on the table between them, the two stick figures, their arms wide. She looked at it for a long time. "I have been in rooms my entire adult life," he said. "Large rooms. Very controlled. And that apartment." He didn't finish that sentence. He started a different one. "It is the first place in 14 years where I was simply required to be present. Not performing something. Not managing something. Present." He looked at the paper. "I don't want to lose that. I want you to come with me." He explained the position he was offering her. Estate nurse for the household. Managing health needs. Keeping her skills current, on a proper salary. A real job. Something she had built. A version of it. That traveled with her instead of ending at someone else's decision. He had thought about this carefully. He knew what she would and wouldn't accept, and he had designed the offer around who she actually was rather than the shape of his own generosity. She was quiet. "The door stays open," she said. "We leave when we choose." "Yes. I keep my work. Or a version of it." "Yes. What this is," she looked at him, at the paper between them. "What this is stays being decided. By both of us." "Yes." She picked up the paper. She held it for a moment, looking at the two stick figures with their arms wide. She set it back in front of him. "Okay," she said. "Yes. If this story has found you, if you feel what's being built here, take a second right now. Like it, subscribe, drop a comment. We're going somewhere else now." The residence was large. It had been designed for control rather than comfort, which meant the rooms were proportioned for authority, and the hallways were wide enough to walk through without touching the walls. Ava moved through it quietly on the first day, noting the architecture the way she noted all environments, systematically, without judgment, establishing what it was and what it required. Eli walked in and immediately tested the banister on the main staircase. He shook it once. It held. He nodded. He walked the full length of the ground floor hallway until he reached a doorway at the far end. He walked through it and stopped. "Are those all books?" His voice was very still. "Yes," Seojun said. "All of them. All of them." From the hallway, Ava heard a sound she had never heard from her son before. Small, involuntary. The sound of someone seeing something they hadn't known they had been missing. She stood in the corridor and closed her eyes for a moment and felt something warm and sharp move through her chest. Hannah appeared from the east corridor with the ease of 11 years of ownership of every room she entered. She was slight, immaculate, moving with a stillness that was not calm but something coiled just beneath calm. She greeted Ava warmly, both hands, a precision of warmth that Ava noted without fully naming. She noticed Eli. Eli looked at her the way he looked at things he was in the process of deciding, with complete, unhurried attention. He said nothing. He went back to the library. That afternoon, a member of staff was cold to Ava in the specific way people are cold to someone they have decided doesn't belong. Not rude enough to name, just pointed enough to register. Hannah witnessed it. She took the person aside quietly. It did not happen again. Ava noticed this. She felt briefly that she had an ally. Eli told her about Hannah that night in his new room, which was 3 times the size of his room on Yungang-aro, and which he was evaluating with the expression of someone for whom more space is interesting but does not change the fundamental calculus of what a room should feel like. "The lady," he said. "The one with the careful face." Ava was tucking the blanket around him. "She's been here a long time. She helps run things. She was watching when we came in." Eli looked at the ceiling. Not looking. Watching. What's the difference? Looking is when you see something. Watching is when you're checking something. Ava was quiet. I'm going to watch her back, Eli said. He closed his eyes with the finality of someone whose decision has been made, and whose position on the matter is settled. Ava turned off the light. She sat in the hallway for a moment with something cold settling at the back of her mind that she could not yet name. The residence found its rhythm. Seo-jun joined them for breakfast in the smaller kitchen near their wing. The homework sessions resumed. Eli still had philosophical objections to mathematics. Seo-jun still made the case with the patience of someone who had all the time in the world for the right argument. The dinner conversations continued. The domestic ease of the apartment on Yungang-aro reconstructed itself here with the same materials. Attention, consistency, the spoon on the right side of the bowl. It was the same thing in a bigger space, attention, consistency, the spoon on the right side of the bowl, and it felt, without either of them remarking on it, like something that had always been going to end up here. One evening Seo-jun mentioned a distribution network decision almost as an aside, thinking out loud in the way that had become possible in this space, in this company. Ava listened. She said, "Have you asked the people on the ground? The ones actually running the routes?" He paused. "Not directly. That would be my first question." He nodded once. 2 days later in the board meeting, the question came up. The table had been moving toward consensus, a clean consensus, the kind that comes from everyone reading the situation and understanding what the person at the head of the table was expected to think. Seo-jun let the consensus form and then said, "Before we decide, have we spoken to the ground managers? I want to know what they see that we don't." A brief silence moved through the room. This was not how decisions were made here. Hannah was at his right. She did not write this down in her notes. She looked at him. Then she looked at the table. Then she wrote something that was not from the meeting. That evening she went to the lower level. Unmarked 3 monitors, Park already set up. He briefed her. Ava Cole, 28. 6 years as a registered nurse. Terminated for filing a complaint that was upheld 18 months after she was gone. Hospital settled a civil suit and Ava received nothing. Currently running a small home care operation. 3 elderly clients. The boy Eli academically top 2% of his cohort. She's clean, Park said. He paused. Nothing she hasn't earned. Nothing she's hiding. He closed the screens. Hannah looked at the dark monitors for a moment. That's all. She walked back to the east wing. She sat at her desk and opened the folder and looked at the word clean on the cover page for a very long time. She understood something she had understood since before she called Park, and that was the specific problem. Ava Cole was not dangerous. She was not a threat in any of the usual categories. The problem was that she was exactly what she appeared to be. Which meant what Seo-jun had found on Yungang-aro was real. Not a performance. Not a strategy. Real. She opened the locked drawer on the left side of her desk. She looked at what was inside. She closed it. Not yet. A week after the board meeting, Seo-jun was on the sitting room floor with Eli. Not beside him. On the floor, back against the couch, long legs stretched out, listening with complete attention while Eli stood in front of the bookshelf and explained the full organizational logic of his library system, which had been reasonable on Yungang-aro but had required significant revision given the new resources, speaking with both hands, drawing invisible structures in the air. His voice had the particular authority of someone presenting a system they have thought through completely and would like acknowledged as such. Hannah appeared in the doorway. East Division decision. Before Thursday. She stopped. She looked at the two of them, the small boy in his blue sweater gesturing with purpose, and the man who ran a 14-year empire on the floor, back against the furniture listening. She looked at Seo-jun's face. She had been in rooms with this man for 11 years. She had watched him across every kind of table. She had seen him in the immediate aftermath of violence, and in the long administrative hours of building something that stayed standing. She had seen his face in the particular exhaustion that follows the decisions that cost the most. She had never seen this. This thing on his face. Attention without performance. Presence without agenda. Something loose in the line of his jaw that she had never once seen there before. Seo-jun. He looked up. East Division, the Thursday decision. I need you. Give me an hour. I'll find you after. She nodded. She left. She walked back to the East Wing and she did not sit down for a long time. In 11 years she had walked into every room that required walking into without being asked twice. She had never been told to wait. Not once. Not for anything. She sat. She opened the drawer. She looked at what was inside for a long time. This time she picked up the phone. 3 nights later, past midnight, the house quiet and Eli deep asleep, Seojun and Ava were in the small kitchen. This had become a habit without either of them deciding on it. The late hour, the small kitchen, the conversation that could only happen after the rest of the world had gone to sleep. There was tea on the table and neither of them had drunk much of it. She told him the real version of the hospital that night. Not the summary. She had given him the summary on Yungang-aro, the past tense in 2 words. The actual version. The patient. What she saw in those lab results and understood immediately and reported through the correct channels, knowing exactly what it would cost her. The drive home after they suspended her. 45 minutes in the parking lot before she could make herself get out of the car. Not crying, just sitting with the specific weight of having done the right thing in a situation where doing the right thing had been designed to fail. Eli at 3 years old when she finally came inside. He had been with the neighbor, but he could tell something was wrong the moment she walked in. He didn't know the words for it. He went to the kitchen and came back with a cracker and held it out to her in both hands without a word. Because it was what he had. And he gave it completely. Without conditions. Seojun listened without hurrying her. Without performing empathy. Without filling the spaces with the reassurances people fill spaces with when they are more interested in their own response than in what they're actually hearing. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he told her something he had not told anyone. The version of his life before the empire. The specific decision point, and there had been one singular irreversible that closed the other options. He did not frame it as loss because he was too precise for that, and because he had made the decision with full information and had not looked back. But precision doesn't cover what something is. She could hear what it was in the space around his words. Did you regret it? She asked. I don't regret things that can't be undone. I note them. She looked at him across the table. And this one? He looked back at her. In the small kitchen, in the residence on the hill, in the city that never fully went dark. I'm noting it differently now. Neither of them moved. The kitchen was completely still. What they did not know. Hannah was in the garden below. She had known the kitchen light would be on. She had taken the longer path deliberately, or she had told herself it was deliberate, told herself she was simply walking, getting air, doing what people did at this hour in houses with gardens. She had failed or chosen not to avoid it. She stood in the dark of the garden and looked up at the lit window and saw them at the table. She could not hear the words. She saw the quality of stillness between them. The specific stillness of 2 people who have stopped being careful about the same thing at the same moment, who have arrived at the same place by different roads and recognized each other there. She saw Seojun's face in the kitchen light, turned toward Ava, and she saw what was on it. She had been in rooms with this man for 11 years. She had never seen this before. Not strategy. Not control. Not the face of a man managing something or deciding something or protecting something. Something else. Something she did not have a word for because she had not seen it on him before. She stood in the garden until the kitchen light went off. She went inside. She walked to the east wing. She sat at her desk. She opened the drawer. She sat in the east wing for a long time that night, the folder open on the desk, the city visible through the window in the particular late-hour way of cities that never fully sleep. She thought about 11 years. Not in summary, in detail. The specific things she had carried. The operations that had needed running that could not be public, that required a person who could be trusted completely and who understood that complete trust meant that the cost was also complete. She had run those things. She had absorbed what they required. She had built the structures that kept his name clean while her own name stayed invisible, because invisible was the only option for the kind of work that actually kept the empire standing. She thought about what she had believed. She had not been naive about it. She was not a woman who confused herself about what a situation was. She had understood that what existed between them had never been stated. He had never promised anything. He had never implied anything that he would not, examined clearly, have claimed. But 11 years of building something together in the same rooms with the same stakes, absorbing the same dangers, 11 years of that looked from the inside like building it together. That was not confusion. That was the reasonable interpretation of sustained proximity and shared consequence. She had believed, privately and without ever stating it even to herself in those exact words, that this level of sustained investment accumulated into something. That competence given completely and consistently was a form of love that would eventually be recognized as such. Not romantically, she was not a woman who confused professional intimacy with something else, but that it would be recognized. That there was a kind of partnership being built in the room she walked through and the decision she absorbed in the years she gave over completely to something they were making together. She thought about the cracker. A 3-year-old boy with a cracker in both hands, offered completely without conditions, because something was wrong and it was what he had. She thought about the difference between that and 11 years of competence. She had given him everything she had. She had given him expertise, loyalty, insulation, the kind of sustained and unglamorous commitment that empires actually ran on. She had been as consistent as a person could be, and she had been good, genuinely good at everything she had done. Competence and a cracker were not the same thing. She had known this in the abstract. The abstract was very different from understanding it was true about your own life, from seeing it made plain in a lit kitchen window, in the face of a man you had built something with for 11 years, looking at someone else with something you had never made him feel. Something you could not have made him feel because feeling was not a product of competence. It was something else entirely. Something that happened when two people stopped being careful at the same moment, in a kitchen in the middle of the night. Something a 3-year-old had understood before she had, which was its own kind of answer. She sat with this. She did not run from it. She was not a woman who ran from things. She let it be exactly what it was, and she understood in the East Wing at 2 in the morning that what she had sacrificed had not been sacrificed for him. She had told herself it had. She had constructed it that way because it was easier to sacrifice for a person than to acknowledge that you had been sacrificing for a feeling about a person, which is not the same thing at all. The feeling had been real. The sacrifice had been real. The error was in thinking that one produced the other. She picked up her phone. She would not be generous about it. Not yet. But she had made a decision. She had made it the moment she stood in the garden and understood that this was real, that he had found something real, and that she was standing in the dark below it, looking up at a window that was lit for someone else. 3 days later, Eli didn't finish his breakfast. Ava noticed the way a former nurse notices. Not alarm, not panic, but a specific narrowing of attention. She tracked it the way she tracked all things she was assessing, without letting on that she was assessing. He was quieter than his usual quiet. He didn't object to anything all morning, which was the loudest possible signal, because Eli always had something to say about something. By noon she was certain. The presentation was specific. The timing was specific. She knew the difference between something that came from outside a person and something that had come from inside the walls they were already inside. She kept her face calm. She sat beside him on the bed and brushed his hair back with one hand. "Tell me what you feel." "Dizzy." He was still, which was wrong. Eli was never still without a reason. "And my stomach is wrong." "Since when?" "Last night. After dinner." "Okay." Her voice was even. Quiet. "I'm going to take care of it." She treated what she could treat. She sat in the chair beside his bed and did the thing she had learned to do. Felt it fully, set it down. And then in the setting down she thought very carefully. About the last 24 hours. About who had been near his food. About the careful face Eli had described on the first night. About the drawer she had never seen opened. She was still thinking when Eli's hand moved beneath his pillow. He produced a small recorder. The kind that came with a child's educational kit. Voice-activated, compact. He had brought it from Yungangaro. Ava had known he had it. She had not known what he had been doing with it. "I recorded something," he said. His voice was slower than usual but his eyes were focused. "2 nights ago." The lady was in the kitchen when she thought I was asleep. He held it out with both hands. Ava took it. She pressed her lips to his forehead. You did well, she said. Rest now. She went to find Seo-jun. She placed the recorder on the surface between them. You need to hear this. He listened. He went very still, the stillness she recognized now, the stillness that preceded decisions. Not anger. Something that was past anger and had become something colder and more specific. Hannah was in the East Wing study when he found her. Sitting at her desk, the locked drawer open, the folder from Park in front of her, organized, complete, arranged in the specific way of someone who has decided to stop maintaining the pretense of a thing and has laid it out where it can be seen. She looked like someone who had been waiting. She looked like someone who had rehearsed this in her mind enough times that arriving at it, finally, was a kind of relief. She looked at him when he entered, and held his gaze without flinching. How is he? He'll recover. Good. She meant it. This was the specific thing about Hannah. Very little she said was not, in its own way, true. She had a quality of precision that would not permit lies even in her own defense. It was, he knew, the same quality that made her exceptional at everything she had ever done for him. It was also part of what made this room, this conversation, this moment such a specific kind of weight. She looked at the folder. She looked at the desk. Then she looked at him and she began to speak. And she spoke with the particular precision of someone who has organized everything they need to say in advance, because they know it will only get one hearing and they will not waste it. She laid it down carefully. 11 years of what she had run, what she had absorbed, what she had built in the spaces that couldn't have his name on them. She told him what it had cost and she did not overstate it, because overstating it would have undermined the case. She told him what she had believed, not assumed believed, not because he had promised anything, but because 11 years of shared consequence from the inside looked like shared purpose. She told him she had investigated Ava. She was clean. She was decent. She had seen something wrong and reported it knowing what it would cost her, and Hannah respected that. She wanted him to know that. She wanted him to understand that this was not about dismissing who Ava was. It is about what I am, Hannah said, and what I have been, and whether any of it counts for anything. But I have earned a position that she arrived at by accident, she continued, and I cannot accept that 11 years of sacrifice counts for less than weeks of feeling something. Her voice was even, not cold, contained. There was a difference and she was aware of it. It is not fair. It is not just. And if you are honest, you know that. He was quiet, because she was not wrong. And he knew it. And she knew that he knew. That was the specific difficulty of this room. She had always known when he was honest with himself, which meant she knew when the honesty was present even when the words were not. You put something in a child's food, Hannah. The first crack. A tightening at the corner of her jaw, barely visible. A fracture in a surface that had been smooth for 11 years. That was a mistake. Her voice did not change. I made a decision I should not have made. That's not sufficient. Not for that. I know. A pause. Then, he is 5 years old. I know what I did. Do you? She looked at him. Yes. No equivocation. No softening. She had the particular courage of someone who intended to face the exact weight of the thing they had done without looking away from it. I know precisely what I did. I made a decision from a place I should not have been operating from. Fear is not an excuse. I am not using it as one. Everything else you've said. He stopped. He looked at her. I hear it. You're not wrong about what you built or what you carried or what you believed we were moving toward. I'm not dismissing it. I know what it cost. I know what you gave. He paused. The room was very quiet. Outside the window the grounds were dark. But the moment you made that decision, everything else was finished. That's not a punishment. That's just what it is. Something moved through her face. Not a crack this time. Something smaller and more final. The expression of a woman arriving at a truth she had been circling for years and was now standing in the center of, looking at it clearly for the first time. She was a woman who did not allow herself the mercy of looking away. She looked at it. She reached into the desk drawer. She brought out a second folder, thicker, older. Nearly a decade of the East Division organized with perfect completeness. The kind of record that only someone who understood the full shape of what they had built could produce. She set it on the desk and slid it toward him. Everything. Clean. No gaps. He looked at the folder. He looked at her. In her face for just a moment, barely a second, the span of a single breath, was something that was not calculation and not strategy and not the controlled composure she had worn for 11 years. A woman understanding fully for the first time that she had spent 11 years building her life organized around a person who had, without intending to, without knowing it, been building something entirely different. In a small apartment on Yungang-ro, with soup and cereal and a spoon on the right side and a child's careful questions. And that what she had built, magnificent as it was, had been built around someone else's life, not her own. I hope you find something that is actually yours, he said. Something you built for yourself and not around someone else. Don't be generous about it. Her voice was quiet, precise. It doesn't suit the moment. He stood. Seo Jun. He waited. She looked at the desk, at the folders, at the empty drawer. At 11 years of carefully maintained consequence, organized and complete and now belonging to someone else. She looked at all of it for a long time. Long enough for the city outside to move through several of its indifferent moments. Go back to your family. She said the word without irony, without bitterness, without the particular performance that comes from people who say painful words for effect rather than meaning. She said it the way a person says a word they have finally, completely made peace with the shape of, even when that shape costs them everything they planned. He left. She sat for a long time. She thought about the cracker again. About what it meant to offer everything you have without conditions and to do it simply without architecture, without strategy, without expecting anything back. She thought about how she had spent 11 years doing everything right and still arrived in this room. She thought about how doing everything right had never been the point, and she had known that somewhere for a long time, and had not let herself know it. Then she picked up her things. She left quietly, which was the only way she had ever done anything. The fallout was real. 3 significant partnerships required renegotiating and 2 dissolved entirely. Certain quarters of reputation dimmed. Operations that had run on specific structures came loose, and rebuilding them honestly was slower and more expensive than rebuilding them the way they had been built before. He lost things. Real things. The kind of things that people who had watched the empire for 14 years noticed and discussed. He lost them without wavering. Because clear decisions made for the right reasons don't waver. And he had been certain about what he was choosing since the moment he took the paper from Eli's hands and placed it against his chest and walked out into a city that suddenly felt too loud for what had just happened. He built leaner. He built differently, the way someone builds when they are no longer constructing a monument to the version of themselves they thought they were obligated to be. Some of the rebuilding was harder. Some of it was better. He asked the ground managers first. He brought different people into the rooms. It was slower and he didn't mind. Eli recovered within the week. He came back to the breakfast table with his books and his cereal and his spoon on the right side, and there was something in the way he carried himself that had not been there before, the particular quality of someone who has come out the other side of something and knows now that they were equal to it. He had been sick and he had been tended to and he had gotten better. And whatever Eli drew from this he drew quietly and did not share it in words. He shared it in the way he set his bowl on the table. In the way he moved Gerald the rosemary pot from the windowsill back to the kitchen counter, where it had the best light, with the settled certainty of someone returning a thing to where it belongs. In the way he opened his homework without a single opening objection and did it completely and correctly before he asked for anything else. Ava watched him and felt something that she also did not put into words. She made breakfast. She poured the cereal. She set the spoon on the right. Several weeks later. Evening. The kitchen. Seo Jun came through the kitchen doorway at 6:40 and stopped. Ava was at the stove. Her back was to the room, her shoulders moving with the ease of someone doing something their hands knew without instruction. Something was on the stove that smelled like competence and memory, the specific smell of a kitchen that is actually being used, that carries the record of meals in its walls. None of his controlled and efficient kitchens had ever smelled like this. Eli was at the table with his homework. Not doing it. which meant he was thinking about something he hadn't decided to say yet. He was looking at the page with the expression of someone who is present in a room but engaged with a different room entirely. Seo-jun sat down. Eli looked up. He looked at Seo-jun. He looked at his mother at the stove. He looked back at Seo-jun. It was the look of a child who has been making careful observations over a long period of time, and has finally, definitively, arrived at his conclusion. "You're staying," Eli said. Not a question. Seo-jun looked at Ava. Her back was to them. Her shoulders were very still. "Yes," he said. "I am." Eli turned back to his homework. He picked up his pencil. He stopped. He looked down at the paper for a moment and then he said it. Said the thing that had been accumulating since the first night, since the bowl, since the spoon, since a man learned where things went by paying attention to where they were moved. "I knew. From the dishes. The first time you got the bowl onto the right shelf without being told." Ava turned around. She looked at Seo-jun and he looked at her and neither of them said the thing that was in the room. There was no need. It had been in the room for a long time, building from small things. Soup and cereal and a spoon on the right and a 5-year-old's careful questions and two people who had stopped being careful about something at the same moment in a small kitchen in the middle of the night. It had been building from the chalk stick figures on a doorstep, from the word home on the wall with the H slightly backwards, from a man who kept a torn corner of paper against his chest because details are how people know you were paying attention, and he had been paying attention since the moment she dragged him inside and locked the door. He had been paying attention for all of it. Eli reached across the table without looking up and moved Seo-jun's spoon 1 inch to the right, correcting its position without announcement, without drama, with the matter-of-fact ease of someone restoring a thing to what it had always been meant to be. "Sit down," Ava said. Her voice was soft. "It's almost ready." He sat. Outside the window was dark. The city moved beyond it, enormous, indifferent, not recording any of this, not keeping track of the fact that the most controlled man in the room had finally, without ceremony, without deciding to, without knowing exactly when it happened, stopped looking at the door. He was just present. That was the whole thing. The wrong door. The right life. And it had started with a knock that barely made a sound. If this story found you, if something in it landed where it was supposed to, please like and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that the door you were never meant to knock on is sometimes the only one that opens into something real. We will see you in the next one.